An event such as today's history-making tragedy is sure to have an impact on the university campus.
No explanation of motive in any normal context.
Question an autopsy on himself to see why he did it.
Several times today by the sniper as they moved around the campus to try to ferret out what was going on.
About the discovery, about a note the man had written. The bizarre and disturbing incident of the sniper was followed very quickly by the discovery of the body of Whitman's wife.
It was a hot and humid day on August 1st, 1966. 25-year-old Charles Whitman arrived at the main building of the University of Texas at Austin. He put on a pair of overalls and headed over to the tower with a cart filled with food, weapons, and ammunition. He would commit one of the worst shootings in American history that day. Charles Whitman was born June 24, 1941 in Lake Worth, Florida. His parents were Margaret and Charles Whitman Jr. His father was a strict man who believed in mental and physical abuse as punishment. He was a self-made man, and Charles Whitman strived to be a success like his father later in life. Charles was the oldest of the couple's 3 sons. His father taught all of his children from an early age how to handle guns. His father would often take the 3 boys on camping and hunting trips. He wanted his sons to be perfect in every way, and if they weren't, he would often raise his belt to them. Charles Whitman joined the Boy Scouts when he was 11, and he became the youngest Eagle Scout at the age of 12. He became obsessed with firearms, and he practiced often. His father later said he could plug the eye out of a squirrel by the time he was 16. In his teenage years, he was a paperboy and attended high school at St. Anne's High School in West Palm Beach, Florida. He graduated from high school in June 1959. After graduation, Charles joined the Marine Corps. It was reported the reason he joined the Marines was after an altercation with his father, and he had had enough. He did not tell his father about his enlistment. After his father found out, it's reported that he tried to cancel his son's enlistment, but this failed. In the Marines, Charles scored a 215 out of 250 as a sharpshooter, a good score, but a step below expert. He got in trouble a few times when he was in the Marines, and on one occasion, he got caught with an illegal pistol. Eventually, he found out that the Marine Corps would pay for his college. So in 1962, he got a scholarship under the NESEP to earn an engineering degree and then later become a commissioned officer. And that is when he decided to enroll at the University of Texas at Austin. He was an okay student at first, and he made friends. He got in trouble a short time after his enrollment for poaching a deer. Someone reported him to the police, and he was arrested and fined. While at college, he met 20-year-old Kathleen Leisner. They began dating in February 1962, and by August, they were married. Friends of the couple and Charles himself said that he was abusive to his new bride. That same year in 1962, a friend of Charles said that he was making some disturbing comments, saying on one occasion that somebody could stand off an army at the top of the clock tower before they got him. Charles' grades began to drop, and in 1963 he lost his scholarship. So the Marines sent him to Camp Lejeune. He was known as a gambler there, and he got court-martialed for it. He got in trouble a few more times at Camp Lejeune, and he was even sentenced to hard labor and demoted. He wrote a diary while he was waiting on his sentence. He was honorably discharged December 4th, 1964. He returned to college, which he now had to pay for out of his own pocket. He worked long hours to pay for school. At first he was a debt collector and then a banker. He wanted so desperately to be a self-made man just like his father had. But that was it. He despised how abusive his father had been to his children and his wife. He strived to be a better husband than his father had been to his mother. But Charles did the same to his wife that his father did to his mother. By 1966, Charles's mother was fed up and she decided to divorce her husband. He convinced his mother to move to Austin with him. He drove down to Florida to go get her. When he arrived, he called the police to assist with the situation. He was worried that his father would try to stop his mother from leaving, or worse. When they arrived back at Austin, she got her own apartment, but they kept in touch often. Charles's father began calling over and over again, begging his mother to come home, and then calling Charles, begging him to convince his mother to come back. Around this time, Charles began getting severe headaches and having disturbing fantasies, and he quit school for a period of time. Money was tight. His wife worked to help with money, but only in the summer months. She worked for the Southwestern Bell Company. Charles was having some noticeable issues, and his wife talked him into seeing a psychiatrist. Charles had seen a number of doctors before he saw the psychiatrist. He met with the psychiatrist in March 1966. This was at the University of Texas Health Center. Dr. Maurice Heatley wrote notes on his visit. A few of the notes read as follows. This is a new student referred by one of the general practitioners downstairs. This massive muscular youth seemed to be oozing with hostility, as he initiated the hour with the statement that something was happening to him and he didn't seem to be himself. The father was a very successful plumbing contractor, without an education, but had achieved considerable wealth. He identified his father as being brutal, domineering, and extremely demanding of the other three members of the family. He expressed himself as being very fond of his wife, but admitted that his tactics were similar to his father's, and that he had, on 2 occasions, assaulted his wife physically. He said that his wife has become more comfortable with him, and he says that she really has less fear of him now than in the past because he has made more intense effort to avoid losing his temper with her. His real concern is with himself. At the present time, he readily admits having overwhelming periods of hostility with a very minimum provocation. Repeated inquiries attempting to analyze his exact experiences were not too successful, with the exception of the vivid reference to thinking about going up on the tower with a deer rifle and start shooting people. He recognizes, or rather feels, that he is not achieving his work at the levels of which he is capable, and this is very disconcerting to him. The youth could talk for long periods of time and developed overt hostility while talking, and then, during the same narration, may show signs of weeping. No medication was given to this youth at the time, and he was told to make an appointment for the same day next week, and should he feel that he needs to talk to this therapist, he could call me at any time during the interval. There's more in the notes about Charles' childhood, about him wanting to surpass his father, his parents' divorce, college, the Marines, and a few other things we went over earlier. You can read the full notes online. It was now July 31st, 1966. Charles bought a pair of binoculars, a knife, and some Spam. Around noon, he had lunch with his mother. His wife was working 2 separate shifts that day. After her first shift, he picked her up and visited friends at 4 o'clock, and they left in time to get his wife back to her 6 to 10 shift. He arrived home after dropping her off and began typing the famous letter. The letter goes over most of what we already talked about, and his plans to end his mother and his wife's lives. It also stated, "After my death, I wish that an autopsy would be performed on me to see if there was any visible physical disorder." He made no mention of an attack from the clock tower in his letter. You can read the full letter online. Charles Whitman then drove to his mother's apartment and ended her life. It was a brutal attack. He left another note in her apartment. He returned home and did the same to his young wife. He wrote at the bottom of his typed letter, now in ink, that he killed both of his loved ones and asked for his debts to be paid if he had any life insurance that would be paid out, and to donate the rest to a mental health foundation. He wanted his dogs to go to his in-laws, and his body to be cremated after autopsy. He spent the rest of that night gathering his weapons. That morning on August 1st, he called his wife's job and told him that she'd be out sick. Later that day, he did the same thing to his mother's job. That morning, he drove and rented a hand cart. Then he went to the bank and cashed $250 in bad checks. He drove and bought an M1 carbine from a hardware store, 2 magazines, and 8 boxes of ammo. He lied to the store owner to ease suspicion, telling them that he was driving to Florida to hunt hogs. From there, he drove to a separate gun shop to buy magazines, ammunition, and cleaning solution for his rifle. He then bought a 12-gauge shotgun from Sears. He brought it home, and he sawed off the barrel and the butt in his garage. He went and got his Marine Corps footlocker. He packed all the things that he had just purchased that morning into it, along with the Remington bolt-action rifle with a 4X scope, a Remington pump-action rifle, a 9mm Luger, 25 caliber pistol, .357 Magnum, 700 rounds of ammo, along with non-perishable food cans, coffee, water, dexedrine, which is an amphetamine, excedrin, water, matches, lighter fluid, rope, binoculars, machete, 3 knives, a small radio, toilet paper, razor, and deodorant. He loaded the footlocker and the handcart into his car, and he headed off towards the main building at the University of Texas at Austin. He lied to the gate guard to get a parking pass. When he arrived in the parking lot, he put on a pair of overalls. He wanted to look like a janitor or a repairman, something to ease suspicion when he entered. He unloaded his footlocker and the handcart, and he headed for the main building. He entered between 11:30 and 11:35. He walked over to the elevator and realized it wasn't working. Vera Palmer was working at the time. She spotted him and walked over to tell him that the elevator was turned off. She went and turned it on for him. And then he said, "Thank you, ma'am. You don't know how happy this makes me." He took the elevator to the 27th floor. He used the handcart he rented to pull the footlocker up the stairs towards the reception area. He reached the guest registry. Edna Townsley was working. Charles ended her life and moved her body behind the couch. At that moment, a young couple was exiting the observation deck. They surprised Charles. He had a gun in each hand, and they believed that he was there to shoot pigeons. They greeted each other, and the couple walked away. He spared their lives, and nobody knows for sure just why. After the couple passed, he made a barricade at the entrance to block anyone from entering. He was about to enter the observation deck when a family tried to get past the barricade. Charles turned and fired, killing 16-year-old Mark Gabor, 56-year-old Margaret Lamport, seriously wounding 19-year-old Michael and 41-year-old Mary Gabor. Charles fixed the barricade and then went to the observation deck. Michael Gabor Sr. and William Lamport were further back when their family was gunned down. They retreated at the sound of gunfire and then went back to help their family, and then they ran for help. Charles Whitman used the handcart to prop it up against the door to keep anyone from entering the observation deck. He then opened his footlocker, took out the weapons, and stationed them around the observation deck. At 11:48 a.m., he began firing. A young pregnant woman, Claire Wilson, was the first to be shot. He could see Guadalupe Street and began firing on unsuspecting people. No one knew what was happening. Some thought it was a joke. Others thought it was some sort of protest. When more and more people began to fall, people started hiding. Most of the casualties were in the first 20 minutes. The pregnant woman was shot, and student Thomas Ekman went to help, and he was killed. Others were wounded trying to help and had to retreat. Whitman fired on unsuspecting college students, teachers, locals, and anyone who could be seen from his sights. Police received the first reports of gunfire 4 minutes after Charles Whitman started his massacre. Police began to arrive and tried to figure out where the shots were coming from. Locals ran home to retrieve their firearms and return fire on the gunman. 23-year-old Army veteran and Austin police officer Billy Speed began firing at the observation deck. Charles Whitman aimed his sights on the young officer crouched behind a stone wall and ended his life. More and more bystanders and police officers began returning fire, forcing Whitman to stay hidden. He fired through storm drains at any targets he could find. When police and civilians had Whitman hiding under the observation deck, many brave people ran out to rescue wounded and dead people. Many were rushed off out of danger and into an ambulance. Whitman continued to fire. He spotted Roy Schmidt 500 yards away and fired. Morris Hoffman was wounded trying to get injured people into an ambulance. The police acquired a 2-seater aircraft. Jim Boutwell, a reserve officer, flew the plane while Marion Lee tried to fire on Whitman. They were unsuccessful, and Charles Whitman managed to fire 2 shots into the airplane. Boutwell flew the plane back to safety. Ramiro Martinez was off duty. He called in and was ordered to direct traffic in the area. This job was already being done, so he ran to the tower and rode up the elevator to the 26th floor. 40-year-old Alan Crum, retired Air Force tail gunner, had been assisting with casualties. He made his way to the tower and offered police for his help. He went with Department of Public Safety agent William Cowan and Austin police officer Jerry Day. Cowan gave Crum a rifle and made him a deputy. The three made their way to the tower. They encountered Officer Martinez on the 26th floor and began making their way up. Austin Police Officer Houston McCoy also reached the tower and met with Martinez, Day, Cowan, and Crum in the tower. Officers Jack Rodman and Leslie Gebert also met the 3 officers and 1 civilian. They found Michael Gabor in the tower. He told the officers that his family had been killed by the gunman. He tried to take one of the officers' rifles. Day and Cowan held him down. Rodman and Gebert took the upset man down the elevator. Martinez and Crum were the first to make their way towards the observation deck. Their conversation followed. Crum asked, "Are we playing for keeps?" Martinez replied, "You're damn right we are." Crum, "Well, you better deputize me." Martinez, "Consider yourself deputized." The 2 men found the deceased and wounded on their way up. Michael Gabor was now awake and told the 2 men he was out there, pointing to the observation deck. They went to the barricaded door and managed to open it. Martinez told Crum to wait there and cover the right side, and told him to shoot anybody that came around the corner that way, and he would go to the left. McCoy and Day arrived, and they went to the right. Crum thought he heard footsteps and fired toward the southwest side. Whitman then crouched along the wall, pointed his gun towards the gunfire. Martinez and McCoy rounded the corner. Martinez fired on Whitman, emptying his revolver into him. Whitman fell, and McCoy fired twice with his shotgun, finally ending the massacre. After all the gunfire on the observation deck, the heavily armed civilians and police officers down below, they started opening up along the whole part of the observation deck tower. But the officers ducked just in time. They weren't hit. The men sent somebody to go tell dispatch to let the media know that the shooter was down. People were shocked when they found out that it was a student who committed these horrible acts. Charles Whitman's father called the police and gave his son's address and his ex-wife's address. It was then when they found Charles Whitman's mother's remains and his wife's remains. They found his note, and at his mother's house they found the note that he left there. Charles Whitman killed 17 people. Their names are as follows: Margaret Whitman, 43, Kathleen Whitman, 23, Edna Townsley, 51, Mark Gabor, 16, Margaret Lamport, 56, Baby Boy Wilson, the unborn child of 18-year-old Claire Wilson, Thomas Ekman, 18, Dr. Robert Boyer, 33, Karen Griffith, 17, Thomas Carr, 24, Thomas Ashton, 22, Paul Sontag, 18, Claudia Rutt, 18, Harry Walchuk, 38, Officer Billy Speed, 23, Roy Schmidt, 29, David Gumby. He died in 2001 from complications. This was one of the worst shootings in American history. Charles Whitman had severe mental problems, and he knew it. He was going to doctors and he was seeing psychiatrists, but it was too late. He snapped. He didn't know what was wrong, but he knew something was wrong. He desperately needed mental assistance. This was a horrible part in American history, and it happens all too often today. And that is the story of the Texas Tower Sniper. There is a whole lot more to the story, with investigations and first-hand accounts and interviews with friends and family of Charles Whitman. You can find a lot of that online. So I hope you enjoyed as much as you could, folks. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you on the next. Peace.